And so I'm seeing something in the Q&A come up a few times, and it's something that I want to emphasize during today's session. It's about balance. What does a typical day look like? How do you balance the requirements of medical school? And also maybe even taking it back a step and saying, well, when you're a pre-med and you have so many different things to do, how do you balance your life, your studying, your extracurriculars, and your sort of having a life outside of it too? So Sana, this question is going to be for you. First, sort of how did you balance that when you were a pre-med? And then now, what does a day in the life look like?
Yeah, I will say, weirdly enough, and I know a lot of you pre-meds are working so hard right now, it felt like being pre-med was harder than med school. I genuinely feel like you have a lot more going on. There's a lot more at stake. You don't know if you're going to get into med school. So just know that if you feel like you're working so hard and you're burning out, that sometimes is normal. And I'm sorry you're going through that, but it might get better on the other side of the admissions game. And yeah, when I was a pre-med, I was an RA. So a lot of my work just involved like kind of being in my room, being accessible to the students who are on my floor. So while I was doing that, I'd kind of multitask a lot. I think that's how I got away with a lot of things, is just multitasking while I was in other extracurriculars. But I guess the biggest advice I'd have for all of the work that goes on when you're a pre-med is pick things you're truly passionate about. Those are the things that come most easily to you. They seem like less work when you're actually doing it. And I know that a lot of you are doing so many things in undergrad. Just remember that there's only so many things you can talk about when you apply to medical school. So I ended up not talking about 2 or 3 clubs in any of my med school interviews or essays. And I think that honestly, if I didn't enjoy those clubs, I shouldn't have done it. And that would have meant an extra hour of sleep for me or an extra amount of time to watch TV or read a book. Now that I'm in med school, I feel like I have a way better grasp of work-life balance. I play pickleball all the time. I think like making time for exercise, cooking every single day. I have a cat. And so I think just prioritizing those sorts of little things that make life fun are really important. And that's also important in choosing a school that emphasizes that high quality of life for students.
And I just want to go quickly back about the leadership question we were talking about a little bit and ask Claire about it, because Claire, you've gone through medical school now and you've seen what that process is like. So you've been a pre-med, now you've been a medical student for several years. How do you handle the workload? How do you develop yourself as a leader during your time in medical school and now getting ready to apply to residency in some time? Like, how have you grown during medical school?
I definitely want to go back to what Misha was saying about taking gap years, it helps you mature. I 100% think I've matured so much in medical school from my first to now being a basically 4th-year medical student. I think there's so many misconceptions that I might have had, or just like false assumptions, thinking that med school was going to be really, I'm not going to have time for friends and family and hobbies. And that's totally not the case as well either. Like, I feel like I've gotten really close with my med school friends. We have social events every weekend, obviously a lot of studying as well. And I think adjusting to a new way to study was something I had to figure out during my first year of medical school, because you do learn a lot more at a short amount of time compared to being a pre-medical student. But I think an important thing too is, prioritizing. Sometimes, yeah, you might not, if you're prioritizing, only studying, then of course you're not going to have time, to spend with your friends or go work out. But if you prioritize that and, realize that like taking an hour break from studying sometimes is going to be more productive than just like trying to study all day, because then you'll feel burnt out. So I think a lot of that was kind of trial and error of what schedule works for me, what routine. But I definitely think you learn that quickly, and it's not something that like, if I can do it, you all can do it as well. So it's definitely more manageable than you might think.
Another question here as well, I'm going to ask Megan. Megan, you're a first year medical student, but you do have to start thinking about what specialty you want to go into. And is there some way that you would recommend for pre-meds to kind of think about what they're interested in specifically within medicine? Is that something that somebody needs to know before applying, or is it something that you develop during the course of your medical school studies?
Yes, so that is also another thing that a lot of first years kind of feel pressure on. Me and a lot of my friends are also kind of the same way, where we're like, I don't know how I'm supposed to know what specialty I want to do, because we're just doing classroom learning right now. We're not doing rotations in the hospital. And so, yeah, it is definitely a struggle, but I think what really helps to figure out what specialty you might be interested in as a pre-med is shadowing whatever doctor in that specialty. And sometimes, you don't even think that you'd be interested in it, but whenever you shadow, it's like, I really liked this doctor, maybe I'll kind of give this specialty a shot. So whenever it comes to declaring what specialty you want or like going into medical school with an idea, you definitely don't have to know anything at all about what you want to do as a physician in the future. I've heard of a lot of people who will like just switch up specialties at the end of their third year, which is crazy because you apply to residency in your fourth year. So all this to say, like a lot of people pivot in the last year before applying to residency. And so I feel like it's something very fluid, like people change their minds a lot. And depending on who you are, you might want to have it decided early on and then you can work on research, but if not, then that's okay too. And if you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, what you can do as a pre-med is engage in research related to that specialty or engage in volunteering in that specialty. So for example, if I was interested in psychiatry, I might shadow psychiatrists. I might start a mental health initiative at my undergrad campus, things like that. And it kind of builds a narrative in your application whenever you do decide to go to medical school. And it's definitely no pressure at all to like stick with that too, like as a pre-med, everyone knows that it's, you're very early in the career path. And once you start medical school, your interests may very well change. There are people who go in wanting to do like peds and then they switch to surgery, or there are people who go in wanting to do surgery and they switch to peds. So I think it's, it depends on who you are and a lot of things can happen. So it's good to keep your mind open. And if you're interested in something, then pursue it, explore it. And if that's not the case, then you move on to the next specialty.
And I see a question directly for Clara, which is kind of about your work-life balance a little bit. Clearly the medical school curriculum is difficult. It's rigorous. There's a lot that you have to do. So outside of it, how do you have hobbies? How are you doing publications and posters and having work experience? How do you balance it all?
Yeah, it's definitely one thing. Like I was saying earlier, you definitely have time for your friends and hobbies, but there are other times, like especially during third year, where you really barely have time to get enough sleep because as soon as you come back from the hospital, you have to study for exams, which are graded and actually, at least at my school, are graded, and it has an impact on our residency application. So it's really hard to do that and make sure you have all your research going, especially if you want to apply to competitive specialties. It can be honestly a lot to balance all this as a medical student, and that's why many of my classmates and around like a third or a fourth of my classmates took gap years as well. Many of them doing research because they wanted to be more competitive for specialties that they're applying to. So taking that extra year kind of helps with trying to figure and balance out everything. And for me, I definitely couldn't work full time while being a medical student. And for me, I wanted to get some full-time work experience to help me with opportunities in the future during residency. So I personally decided to take the year off, and it's been great to work, also have time for my hobbies a little bit more. But definitely fourth year of medical school as well. It's going to be a lot of free time after submitting applications. So basically, I'm really excited for that.
Those were such fantastic answers. This was clearly so helpful. We really want to thank all the panelists for being on today, for taking time out of your weekend to help answer direct questions. We got through so many questions. Obviously, everyone is going to be following you on social media and asking more. This was just an incredible, incredible panel. Thank you all so much.